Good afternoon, colleagues, and welcome to the Audit Committee on the 21st of July at County Hall at 2 o'clock. We have apologies from Councillor Lynn Rosal, who I think is joining us online, and Councillor Sally Morgan sends apologies but is hoping to join us online later, possibly. So we are us and our officer team supporting us, and welcome, thank you very much, and welcome to Councillor Denise Bickley, Cabinet Member for part of the Children's Services, with SEND, isn't it? That's right. Lovely, thank you very much. Declarations of interest. Anything interesting to declare? No, there's none of those, thank you. The minutes of the 12th of June, are you content that they're a correct record? May I sign them in due course? Thank you. Okay. There's nothing of urgency I'm aware of. No one wants to say anything exciting about that. So let's move to item 5, which is the annual governance statement. Colleagues, remember it was on our last agenda. We deferred it until this meeting so that members had a chance to double read it for any commentary on it. So if I come to the Director of Legal and Democratic and the Director of Finance and all things probity.
Thank you, Chair. So the annual government statement is produced every year. Just to take to maybe some of the salient points, page 9 of the report details risk management, pages 10 to 11 detail all the scrutiny committees and what they have dealt with and financial sustainability. Page 13 deals with the governance review and the work of the governance working group to date. And probably the page that you're going to be most interested in is page 15, paragraph 5.1, which just details the challenges that we have dealt with in governance during the year, particularly highlighting around SEND and the safety valve, children's services and the devolution deal. Very little to really report. That's glowing red, I think, or that's problematic in the report, and not much changes from last year. Pages 20 onwards just deal with the action plan and the updates on what we've dealt with so far this year, Chair. So unless you have any questions or the Director of Finance and Public Value has anything to add, I'll leave it at that.
Director of Finance.
Thank you. Nothing to add at this point, Chair, other than to say the draft annual governance statement had to be published by the end of June, and we met that timetable. It was signed by the Chief Executive but noted as draft. We now have the summer where it will be subject to audit, and then the final version for approval when the statement of accounts are approved later in the year, and Grant Thornton, our external auditors, have also reviewed it.
Thank you very much. Colleagues, any questions? No? We've all had a good chance to read this one, so we've had it a good, 5-6 weeks. So the recommendation then, I think, is to approve, isn't it? Yes. So Councillor Sellis will propose. Councillor Hayward will second. Are we in favour? Yes. That's 4 of us. Yes. Sounds like one of those quiz shows, isn't it? That's 4 yeses. You know. All right. Thank you very much. Quite. So let's move to item 6, which is the SEND Special Educational Needs and Safety Valve, which are pages 31 to 46 in the report. Director of Finance.
Thank you, Chair. At our last audit committee, we had a discussion about the safety valve and the authority's financial position and the impact that SEND is having on our risks and our cash flow. So you asked for this paper to come and called this special meeting so that you could consider it. I'm going to hand over to my deputy, Matt Thorpe, who's going to take us through the paper, and then we'll take any questions that members would like.
Good afternoon. So as Angie said there, the paper really gives a bit of a potted history of the engagement that we have had with the DfE in reaching a safety valve agreement and our participation of it. A little bit around what's involved with that in terms of the financial and reporting and monitoring aspects of it, and then goes into some detail around the commitments that we've made to supporting funding elements of it. So that's essentially making contributions towards accumulated deficit over what period of time the agreement sort of covers, and the financial impact of those commitments into our medium-term financial plan, essentially. I've also included there an extract from our budget statement of robustness, as well as the actual safety valve agreement itself, which highlights the levels of accumulated deficit the plan put in place, as well as the DfE's contributions into that programme. Beyond that, welcome any questions or comments.
Thanks very much. Any questions from colleagues? Paul, Councillor Hayward.
When we've discussed this last time, we I think reached an agreement that we're borrowing from ourselves. Is that correct? Essentially to fund this, the money we would have had, we've used reserves, we've used other things, and there's a consequence of that. The mechanism by which the government funds us 95 million, they give us then 6.33 million each year until 2030-31. I suppose the issue is there's no way to argue for more. That essentially is we take what they give us. Is that correct? There's no negotiation. There's no saying actually you need to do more. Our situation's worsening because we're in the same boat as these other 38 authorities around the UK. Sorry, it seems it's a vague question, but for anyone watching who doesn't major in financial, readjustment, let's call it, I just want members of the public and anyone watching this to understand how it's funded and the consequences for this authority. Could we drive a harder bargain, perhaps?
Okay, so I wouldn't describe it as borrowing from ourselves as such, but everything else you said there was correct. So our contributions are made up of in year from within our performance against our budget, contributions towards it, reserves contributions, budget assumed contributions over the remaining term of the agreements. That's the 5 million each year, which from day one, whatever happens with service demand and savings and government funding, we have a commitment to find that 5 million, as well as foregoing some of the interest earning opportunities for the council's bottom line to recycle into that. So there's a number of different elements that kind of make up our contributions into that. I would suggest that the actual safety valve discussion process pushed the DfE and ourselves to try and make maximum contributions that both sides were able and willing to make at that point in time. And the kind of in-year negotiation, as you frame it there, the DfE have made statements that there's no further safety valve considered sort of appointments through that. They've sort of said that it's kind of a waiting game now until they come through with what their changes will look like to the SEND sector. And they have alluded to some support as part of the kind of summer sort of fiscal event. But I don't know if Angie on holidays picked up on anything different to I have, but I've not seen what that actually means yet. If that's sort of some additional funding, I would be surprised if it would be, simply because there is such national overspend and the areas that are in part of the safety valve programme are also not delivering against those targets as well from it. So I guess there's a lot of uncertainty until that white paper comes out in the autumn to kind of clarify what some of that may look like. Does that answer?
Yeah, thanks, Matt. So I think the internal borrowing situation that you're describing, I think we were talking about the depletion of our cash balances. So the government provide a level of funding through grant for special educational needs. From memory, it's something like 110 million, something like that. But whenever we overspend that, we're spending it in a good way, supporting the children of Devon, but it's our own cash that is then supporting that because the government is not funded. And that's where the cumulative deficit comes from. So when we did our statement of accounts at the end of March, the cumulative deficit, I think, Matt, was 169 million, something like that. And that's cash that otherwise would have been in our bank account. So that's the scale of the cash that's gone out the door, but is no longer there for us to invest and earn interest on and to keep ourselves sustainable. And we can't keep going like that because our cash balances are coming down and down and down. So yeah, you're quite right in remembering that. Last time we met, we just had the spending review from the government. And at that point, they'd been silent on what was happening with SEND, and we were desperately disappointed because the headlines were that there was a roadmap coming that was going to, if not give us detail, at least give us the government's direction of travel. And in the end, the Chancellor was silent on it in the chamber, but in the detail, and came out subsequently, was that there was going to be a review into the autumn. Since then, since we last met, we have been told that the statutory override that keeps the deficit in the strange place on the balance sheet has been extended or will be extended for another 2 years. So it means that that point where that negative reserve would hit against our own reserves has been postponed, but we've still got the issue that it's knocking on 170 million at the end of last year, and it will go up again. The budget for this year is for that to increase by another 44 million. We will get some money from government, the 6 million that were expended, but it's nothing compared with the level of overspending that we're seeing year on year. So it's still an issue, we still need to tackle it. And as Matt said, the government's indications are that they're not engaging in conversations about extending safety valves or entering into any new ones until the statement in the autumn, when we should have the white paper and we should have plans. I don't know what the plans are for clearing the cumulative deficit, because something's got to happen to remove them from all of the authorities' balance sheets. There are rumours that there might be some sort of borrowing for local authorities and powers to undertake borrowing, but it is nothing more than rumours. I've not seen a statement from government saying that is their approach, but I know there are conversations and rumours, but we wait and see. We should know in the autumn, but at the moment we don't know.
So if, I mean, let's not in presume, on conjecture. So they, let's think they allow us to borrow that money, 167 million. Effectively, someone lends us that money that replenishes what we've already paid out, but now we've got a stonking great debt that we've got to pay interest on. Is it conceivable, I suppose it's at what rate you're lent the money, that if we can earn more from that money than the amount of debt repayment, actually we're slightly better off? And it's not just a case of the government forgiving the debt, because we've lost that money. It's gone out of our bank account. We've lost the opportunities for it. So it's the big question. If you were in charge of the government, what would be the ideal? What would be the ideal for this authority, for a government, any government, to resolve this issue? What would work best for us?
Firstly, I'm sure there's nobody who wants me in charge of the government. So with the interest earning, we would borrow probably from what was the Public Works Loans Board, the debt management organisation, was effectively government itself. So I suspect that would be the source of the borrowing. But depending on what the powers was, and this is all make believe because we haven't got any instruction yet, but we would seek to try and get the best rate we can. So I think unlikely we could invest it for very much more than we would borrow. We'd be lucky if we could break even, probably. But the other part of borrowing the money is that you then have to set aside the money, set aside to repay the borrowing. So you end up having to set aside, not only pay the interest, but you have to set aside money to build up a fund so that you can pay it back in the 25, 50 years, whatever is allowed. So it would definitely cost us money. We won't gain from that arrangement. And of course, even if government do, and it is only if, allow us to borrow or allow authorities to borrow, we've then end up having funding that rather than the government, unless there's some sort of shared responsibility. Don't know, there might be extra funding coming for it. But you've then got the ongoing issue. So that sorts out the deficit. You've then got the ongoing fact that we're spending 44 million a year more than we're being funded. So is our funding from government going to go up 44 million? Else within a few years, we'll be back at 150 million again. And so it's very difficult, and I don't, it's very difficult for government, and I don't think anyone's got an easy solution for this, because either the requirements need to reduce or more money needs to come into the system, or probably a bit of both. But that's with government, and I don't think anyone's got the solution at the moment. And I suspect that's what government are working on, ready for the white paper in the autumn. So we need that white paper, and that will answer many of the questions that we're all asking.
Yep. Sorry, just to add one little point to Angie's comment there. So although if government were to give that permission to borrow, we wouldn't be entering the market alone. There's £5-6 billion worth of accumulated debt or forecast accumulated debt within DFE. So that would have a hugely destabilising impact in terms of whatever rates of lending or borrowing takes place. If that almost enters the market overnight. So I think just to re-emphasise there, it'd be unbearable or unmanageable.
Sorry, I thought
Sorry, apologies. If we could just make sure microphones are used, because I won't hear you online, it won't follow you. Sorry, your voice.
Okay, thanks. In the text, there's an assumption that we're making savings. And I'm just wondering if we're actually achieving any savings. And my second question would be also about the local government review, and putting this all into the context, is the government seriously aware of all the implications that we have, the real problems and we're not alone in our deficits and what have you. But it all seems so, to my simple, tidy mind, it all seems so incredibly confusing. And I'm just wondering, as a council, are we asking the right questions? Are we as the audit committee asking the right questions? Is our council making savings? Are we still able to deliver the care? And does the local government review, are you having to balance balls in the air, plates in the air, whatever, with all this thinking? I'm sorry that the question is rather muddled. However, the situation is so muddled in my head.
Yeah. So as part of the safety valve agreement process, we had to demonstrate to the DFE that we had a number of forecasts and projections, demographic growth and sort of need growth and complexity and all of that kind of aspects of it were in line with their sort of high level assumptions. We also had to demonstrate to them that we had plans in place to try and mitigate to some extent that growth and then level it off and kind of keep within that funding envelope. So the savings programs have been reviewed by the DFE as part of the agreement, and that's part of the rigour that they applied to sort of signing those off with their SEND advisors and with their financial advisors that have been involved with it as well. But we do have planned savings each year. So for example, last year we had circa 15 million of reduction savings, we'll call it, with against that planned money budget management, and I think we delivered around 11 million of it. This year we're up to, so I was just quickly looking for the number again there. I think it's about 22 million is the plan for the current year. 22.5 million, and we're forecasting at this stage in the year about 16 million delivery of it, but work's going on to try and ensure that that's maximised or and done as much as possible within there. But I guess it's also important to emphasise that those savings aren't reductions in service. They're mainly about improvement, efficiencies, financial management, building capacity, getting the right education taking place within the right setting. So obviously cheapest is within a mainstream school, but sometimes they'll need extra maintained specialist support within those schools. We need to build capacity to ensure that that's there to stop it escalating up to the higher, more expensive levels of education support. So that independent special sector that is much more expensive on a like-for-like basis.
Thank you for that. So the processes that and so the policies and procedures, they're changing to to deliver more robust, streamlined services, but there's still the children are still getting the care and attention, and that it is now more streamlined. Is this sort of future-proofed, or is this just something that's a sticking plaster?
Hopefully it sticks. So, part of the process. So obviously there's statutory requirements that the teams need to respond to when a child or young person presents with an EHCP. The team are continuing to maintain their duties in that way, as you know, as long as capacity and a setting exists for that child then, or that young person, the placement will continue. The ones which are looking at should in theory improve and continue to hold that level, so through improved commissioning as an example, or improved capacity within schools. If we're building extensions to schools to be able to accommodate, they're going to be there, you know, and maintained throughout the process. Similarly, as the paper says, we have sought opportunities to get capital investment to support that as well. So although obviously there'll be a running cost implication, the big upfront cost is actually building that capacity into it. So we'll be exploring that. We use the capital programme to support it, as well as the funding opportunities come up, organisations involved in the safety valve have had the opportunity to bid into capital funding that isn't available to those within there. That's makes reference in the paper to the FE colleges as well.
Please, and then I come to Councillor Rake.
Thank you. Regarding LGR, and you asked if government were aware, people who are in charge of local government reorganisation are aware of SEND. Yes, they are. So MHCLG are leading the LGR agenda, and they've been involved extensively with the Department for Education. I think it's fair to say, if you go back 18 months, it was quite an adversarial relationship between the two departments, but more recently, I've not witnessed, but heard comment that they're working much more closely together to understand one another's situation. So I'm much more hopeful now than I was when I witnessed it previously. With regard to LGR, government are aware, but it is tricky because organisations like the County Council have got significant SEND deficits, and that causes difficulties for any organisation. So there's no solution to it yet. So LGR is being created and the business cases are being created with a big part of the jigsaw puzzle not yet resolved. So we've got the SEND deficit issue that's not going to be resolved, the white paper, until the autumn. We also have, running in parallel with that, the government are doing work on a fairer funding reform, as they call it, which is looking at the different formulas that are used to fund local government. So that's another piece of the jigsaw puzzle that we don't have when we're working on LGR. So there is a bit of difficulty in working on LGR, let's say that.
Thank you. Councillor Rake.
Thank you, Chair. Looking at this report and what we've heard today, the safety valve programme comes with constraints and requirements. And in 3.9 you say that in 24-25 we were unable to meet one of the targets contained within, and in 3.17 I think you say that not meeting the obligations of the safety valve agreement could lead to this being reviewed or removed. Are we clear about what the mechanisms for triggers for such a removal or review would be, and what the consequences would be?
So there's been a few examples of authorities where they have had the payments paused while the DFE goes in and reassesses, are they making best endeavours, doing everything they can do to actually manage the pressures that they're facing with. I think it wouldn't just be a blanket cut off and then no further. I think there would be those sorts of discussions to continue around that. I think it's that best endeavours or taking all possible action that we have to now provide that assurance on, because I think the wording in the return is subtly different around that now with the in-year monitoring return that we have, and the discussions with the advisors who then relay those core messages up to the DFE. I think I would be unclear what that would mean for us locally in terms of, you say, what are the consequences and the cut-off from it. But as Angie said, the 6.3 million that we're receiving from the department every year, although it is still 6.3 million, we are continuing to face overspend pressures of 44 million or forecast for this year. So it's not the game changer that the 95 headline is and the 38 up front in terms of our cash balances was, but obviously we're making best endeavours to ensure that we're doing everything we possibly can to meet the requirements from the DFE. But as you say, one of the indicators is, are we going to break even and are we going to pay off that accumulated deficit? One hopefully follows the other, but at the moment it's looking unlikely that we will be able to within the time frame of the agreement.
Thank you. Shall I save you, Councillor Bickley, until the end? Would that be all right for your commentary? Just got some things I want to pick up. I want to thank you for the report. It's been a very wide-ranging discussion, not necessarily wholly focused on audit, but it's such a big subject. Anything that we can do to help members understand the cause of the deficit and what's being done about it, I think is time well spent. But it strikes me, we talk about a deficit, but I think one of the things the Director of Finance said, which we should all be focused on, is that actually the purpose of them spending has been about helping children in Devon who needs educational support for their education and disability. No finer purpose could an overspend be generated than that. It's not being frittered away. So we talk about deficits and we talk about overspending against the government budget, but ultimately thousands of children in Devon are supported by what this council has done collectively. Nonetheless, as the director says, the impact on the bottom line of the council, which for a number of years has been affordable, sustainable, eventually has got to a point when the very financial health of the council is at risk. Not imminent, but is at risk. And I think if we were looking at red, amber, green, these are amber flashing lights for all members about where we are at. The government has helped in part by knocking the can 2 years down the road in terms of carrying what is euphemistically called a negative reserve, which is the money, isn't it? But look at the spend, isn't it? The Deputy Director talks about another 44 million this year. Another 44 million trips off the tongue so easily, isn't it? The council in this report is identifying that at the end of March 2026, our reserves, both earmarked and general, will be about £99 million. For a council of this size, that may sound a lot of money, but that's probably, what, 3 days worth of spend, if that? So it's a frightening number that we're in. So our job as an audit committee is to test with our finance colleagues whether that level of reserve is generally sort of comfortable, and I suppose that depends on your degree of risk and comfort about it, and then what action's being taken or is planned to put money back into reserves to build that up. As a committee, it's not our job to go and look again at the safety valve agreement that was made. With the benefit of hindsight, we might sit there and say, well, should the council have agreed to it? Had it not, we wouldn't have had the 90 million. Had it not, we wouldn't have been able to apply for the capital funding to support some of the work that we're doing in order to help. So there were perils in not signing up, and there were benefits in signing up, although we might sit here now and say, was it genuinely the best agreement the council could have got? I'm minded to think at the time it was probably the best available on the day. We can all sit there and say that. So I wanted to take colleagues, if I may, to just a couple of questions which were around the savings. So you've talked about the challenges in making the savings that the council committed to. What happens if we don't make, if I just ask the questions, if you make a note of them and then you can answer them, what happens if we don't make the savings? What plan is there in place to start replenishing reserves, or do we have a strategy for that? Because the council has mainly relied on internal borrowing for all of its needs over the past 15 years, is it in a position where it would borrow to repay the internal, borrowing for other capital projects in order to free up cash reserves or cash flow, which might then be used to support special education needs spending in the future? Does that circle make sense? We borrowed internally to do capital projects in the past 15 years. Because we need to free up cash flow, we borrow from wherever to pay that money back in, which then goes out the door for special education needs. Is that a risk that the council faces? I'll just stop at that point.
Okay, so in terms of the savings programme from it, the agreement with the DfE doesn't specifically state what we should be doing to meet that savings requirement. As you see, it just gives us an end of year accumulated deficit amount. So you'd hopefully that if a savings delivery looks like it's going offline or that it's not going to deliver it in fully, that gives us the flexibility to try and do something different as well as in year or over a period of time, which is sort of the tack that we've been trying to make there. So I think the consequences of it are we would overspend by more than we would expect to, but it's not just savings delivery that forms part of the overspend there. You know, although I stated we were making assumptions around growth in plans, population numbers, etc. If they exceed what we put in within the safety valve agreement, which they are, that would also drive our cost up. So savings delivery is one aspect of it. The actual numbers of children with plans is another as well from it. In terms of the replenishing reserve, so we have tried to start doing that this year as part of budget setting, but it's only really through budget setting that we're able to do that, or if there is a incidental underspend at the end of the year, and cabinet would be minded to use that underspend to support reserves build up. So they're the two options that we've essentially got from it. And I think, Angie, was it £1 million this year that we put back into the reserves? Sorry, 14. Sorry, yeah, it was after that. So we built 14 million back into it because the reserves were dropping down. Again, compared to the overspend versus the amounts, it's probably still not big enough to maintain that stability at the moment against safety valve, but then it's a risk-based judgment against everything else that exists around it. Finally, I guess internal borrowing is, I think, what you're describing there is actually refinancing the capital programme. So that's taking a view on how much we can take out new borrowing to offset some of that internal borrowing. And I think that's part of the considerations that we've got to take into account to fund the cash deficit that we're faced with. Equally, you've got flexibilities. Again, that was part of the budget round of flexibilities under flexible use of capital receipts, where you sell assets and you can use that to support some transformation activity. We are looking to explore using that to support the improvement plan, as it were. But yeah, refinancing is definitely an option which we probably need to be minded to in terms of managing cash balances.
Director, please. Thank you.
Thank you. I just wanted to confirm what you were saying.
Hold on, Matt, would you?
Sorry.
Thank you.
Thank you. Just confirm about the 3 days. You mentioned reserves for 3 days, and that relates to the working balance. So in addition to the earmarked reserves, we have a working balance of about 16 million. And you're quite right, Chair, it's about 3.5 days. That's so are those 16 million's a lot of money? Doesn't keep us going for very long. That's effectively our emergency backstop. Thank you.
Thank you. I've got one more question, if I may, and I'll come to you, Councillor Sellers. So if I can take colleagues to page 39, at 4.2 in the report, it talks about the monitoring reports, which are the reports that we do for the government on our working towards the safety valve achievement. So the monitoring report should include progress against conditions. May I ask who in this council sees the monitoring report. So, for example, do the cabinet members for children's services or the cabinet member for finance, does the leader see the monitoring report?
No, I think that's signed off by the directors.
Sorry, two questions. I wasn't worried who signed it off. I just wondered if they saw them, if they saw the monitoring report. Do they have them routinely?
Well, the impact's discussed with them, I think, but I'm not sure if you.
That neatly sets up Councillor Bickley, because you're asked to speak, if you want to speak.
Yeah, on that question, I'm not sure that I have seen the formal one.
No, well, I think we'll make a recommendation shortly, but you indicated to speak generally.
I think that there's an enormous amount of work going on behind the scenes to come to council about everything to do with early intervention, for example, in schools, and I'm hoping that the white paper would mention that. I think at the moment what we've seen is 10 years of austerity and COVID and everything else making problems far greater than they needed to have been. It's like having a cut on your hand. You know, if you don't deal with it at the time, it may come back and bite you with toxic shock syndrome and everything else down the line. I'm just thinking of a child who has a speech and language problem at age 2. If they were dealt with at that time, it wouldn't need to get to ES.
Councillor, sorry, you may just need to start again. I realise that the microphone's a bit too far away from me, so either pull it down in a bit.
I was whittering a bit and much to miss there.
I don't.
Can you hear me now?
And thank you.
I was just saying that in the white paper, we're hoping that it will become much more of an early intervention and an inclusivity kind of education system. At the moment, we have massive amounts of EHCPs being applied for that shouldn't even be EHCPs. They should be dealt with in schools as ordinary available inclusion provision, which isn't happening at the moment. So it's making a problem far more expensive to councils across the whole country than it needs to be. So I think the white paper in the autumn should detail more of that, and we are working towards that. And I think that's working with the assessor from the DFE. That's definitely, it feels like the direction of travel. So all the things that are being put in place to sort out the children's services are working towards that idea of trying to get in early in localities, trying to help children and schools and have proper partnerships with schools so that this sort of problem wouldn't become the problem it has become. We have to look at where that overspend is coming from, and there are so many initiatives that are all joining together to make that much more future-proofed. So that's not helping with the funding at the moment. That doesn't get rid of the deficit now, but it should, as these things come through, should stop them growing to that extent.
Thank you for that, and I think it's reassuring. I mean, there have been a lot of actions over a long period of time, but we have to start somewhere. So everything that helps and contributes. Chief Executive.
Just to come in and firstly, in terms, is this future-proofed? No, because unless national policy changes, then every single county council in England has said that this won't change unless the policy changes. There's a fundamental issue with the policy. So the white paper, you can't underestimate enough how significant that is to providing a solution. All the colleagues that I meet, and we as chief executives say that this is the biggest risk to our sustainability or any future shape of council sustainability, or indeed, having been out in a school in Devon on Friday, linked to the sustainability of our school placements and our school settings, because our schools are in a position as we are that there is a request for further support, and there isn't the sufficiency in Devon to meet that support. So I think it's important to say that in terms of parts of Devon, albeit where everybody's, I think, in the same direction now of what they think they should look like and expected policy changes, we don't have the sufficiency in place to create the right environments for young people. So I think it's important to say that there's not a future solution, but for the future solution for Devon, there has to be significant capital investment in our localities so that schools and county together or future councils can work together so that children get the right support in a place-based approach. and we don't have that in place just now. And I know the members are working very hard on that. In terms of the governance question asked by the chair, I think it's important to say in meeting the auditors last week that I was very clear with the Anton that the deficit and send is the biggest risk to the financial sustainability of this council. And I'm just saying publicly today what I've said to the auditors last week. I know that as directors, we all agree on this matter because we don't have a plan to mitigate it. That's the reality. Finally, what I'd like to say in terms of the governance piece is that SEND is a major transformation programme. What we've discussed with the auditors in terms of the structures in council is that where do we report transformation, big work streams attached. So we have on my screen here huge documents that go via the SEND transformation board that the member sits on. We have matters that go into scrutiny, but that bit about is transformation and performance working hand in glove, which does affect the finances of the council. And there'll be major projects every year that do that. We need a structure chair that recognises that. And I can say I've had discussions with the leader and with the cabinet about this, and we're looking to work to develop a space where we can have that transformation governance in the council, because when you're making such a big change, it's not one part of the council that's doing it, it's the whole council that's doing it. And we don't really have at this moment in time a transformation member-led governance place that can hold these big change projects to account in terms of members being informed. So we're working on that as a matter in the governance. We take it to the governance group in terms of where all members are represented to perhaps come forward, because it's back to your question about who's looking at this and when, in terms of, you know, a cabinet leads are steeped in the practice improvement and some of the elements, but it's making sure the whole council is doing its bit. So I thought it was important to respond directly to that question, that there is a need for a space to look at this, be it be the governance review that would look at that. I'll just look at my colleague now in terms of how we would do that.
So I think our next governance working group set up for the 8th of September. Got the date wrong there.
August.
So we'll confirm the date. We'll confirm the date of the governance working group. But yes, it's something that will need to go to our governance working group. It's not going to be a formal committee, but it will be a board where all members have the involvement to see what's going through. The plan would be for that to work its way through scrutiny, audit and other committees, so you're all getting a view of what's been worked upon at the board. But it's really to give the transparency and the oversight that actually improvements are happening, and then work it through our governance system, so actually that becomes public and you can see it at audit, scrutiny and the relevant governance routes.
Thank you. Colleagues, oh sorry, councillors.
Yeah, pupil premium, historically Devon hasn't done very well with the pupil premium, and I'm just wondering if there's anything relevant that needs mentioning or airing about the pupil premium and the knock-on effect that it does have with the challenges that we have delivering services.
The challenge we have at the moment is that the spending review is looking at all the criteria that make up a whole range of funding pots across all services. We're participating in a consultation on that at the moment. But one matter that we weren't doing well enough was the auto enrolment for free school meals. So we've now got a programme looking at that. That automatically has a positive impact on school funding in Devon. So it's my understanding that that project is progressing well, and we're expecting it to be in place by September. So that will help that area, but I have to point out that that might help in one way, but if the funding formula for all areas in England is about to be changed, and we're expecting not to be one of the big winners in that, then we could get money there, but we could lose money somewhere else. So I think it's really imperative for every single member of the council, and as it comes through, is tuned into what those changes might be, but I'm not sure exactly whether we'll have enough detail on that prior to budget setting next year, but there will be transitional.
And that's really helpful. So let's try and draw it to a close. So I think what we know is the known risk is the current deficit on SEND. The unknown risk is the government's change in funding formula, which could be anything. Councillor Hayward, I'm keen to draw it to close.
Thank you, Chair. I suppose it's just a general question. Again, there's something that perhaps comes to the underlying thing. In a household budget, you end up with a deficit, an overdraft, if your income falls below your outgoings, or your costs of what you're buying go up, or you're buying more of the same at more cost. Obviously, this deficit has come from somewhere because we've spent more. So just for the purpose of that, is it because, and I've had some interesting information, the auditor picked up on child care in another part of the report about what our costs are. And that report made clear that effectively we are at the mercy of third-party private providers who basically can charge what they want, and we have no option. And that was quite clear from the information I got that came from another audit comment that was raised. Is that the case with SEND, that effectively we are being held to ransom by third-party providers, or are we dealing with that, but we just have more and more and more demand, and unless that demand goes away, and Councillor Bickley, you covered it, effectively it can be fixed, but we'll get the benefit of that in the future, but we've got the problem now. So what quality of it? Is it that we are at the mercy of third-party providers in the private sector, or is it being managed in-house, but just the demand is exponential and we can't keep pace with it?
So I suspect it's both of those, but Chief Executive.
Just say there's a lot of providers that provide a fantastic placement for young people, and its level of complexity. So we will only improve things if we get greater sufficiency locally, because often families are going to other sectors because we don't have that provision in place. A good example last year is where we increased over, but that was with capital investment of nearly £10 million. We increased our capacity in the 16 to 18-year-old placements locally with colleges, but that took that capital investment so that we could do it. So that's where we've got to take sufficiency, capital investment, and then there is a bit of having the capability in terms of staff and support in some of the local areas, which is not there.
So thank you for that, and I think that was the clarity I was after, that similar to the adult social care, and we're not discussing that today, the foundation or some of the foundation of that problem is an NHS problem. And I'm grateful for your clarity here that actually, if we want a national solution from government to help our SEND deficit, they've got to come up with some solutions within the NHS, because obviously it's an educational and health need as well. So unless you are fixing one, you can't fix the other. So thank you for that clarity. I think that's where all of us, and obviously you speak to ministers a lot more than we do, that message needs to go back, that you fix both, and that will help us. Unless you fix that, government, we're on a hiding to nothing, really. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to come to recommendations shortly, colleagues. I just wanted to check, based on that last conversation and the point made by the Chief Executive, is there something this committee can do to include in recommendations with regard to NHS contributions? And I'm mindful that in previous Ofsted reports, the inspectors, the visitors, Ofsted inspectors, I don't know if you call them inspectors, we'll call them inspectors for the purpose of this meeting, have sort of generally referred, if my memory serves me right, to, you know, our partnership working, that the whole system needed to work. It wasn't simply a Devon County Council problem, although we own it. So I'm going to come to some recommendations in a moment, and I'll be hopeful if perhaps between the Chief Executive, Head of Legal, Director of Finance, you might find a collective form of words that helps the committee support you with regard to the NHS. So colleagues, we were originally asked to note the report, but might I make some suggestions? One is, I think we ought to identify the committee's concern regarding the depletion of the council's cash balances, albeit for a very good purpose, supporting children, but we should record that. Secondly, might we confirm in our recommendation that we note the significant risk presented to the council as a result of the SEND deficit? And then two things. One is to call upon the council, and that would be the cabinet member for finance, working with the director of finance to create or develop a strategy to replenish the council's reserves, which we understand, you know, are low. And then secondly, might we also recommend that the relevant cabinet, the ones with SEND responsibility, finance and the leader, are sent copies of the monitoring reports that are sent to government on the achievement of a safety valve. Does that make sense? Yeah. Yep. Okay. So we've got those, and we'll just wait now for the panel report on NHS.
Chair, I think it's important to say that we've the Director of Public Health has been working on protocols around accessing funding linked with the NHS. I would also say that we've looked at that practice across the country, and it's a really challenging area. However, I think that challenge should be shared publicly so people understand it, because I'm on the, you know, provide direction to, I think there needs to be a report on the challenges and scale of accessing NHS funding in relation to AHCPs, because I don't think we've pulled that together anywhere.
So I'm just looking for a sentence to, which is a recommendation from this committee, albeit that's written by you. So you're writing a paragraph there.
So we had to go at 2. So direct officers to prepare a report on the challenges and scale of assessing NHS funding, accessing NHS funding in relation to EHCPs, and secondly, ask the relevant cabinet member to report back to Audit on the progress with the work with partners.
Taking both of them together.
So both of those from the officer side, along with our selection of the excellent earlier. Is that all right? Brilliant. Are you sorted? I'm propose a seconder. Councillor Rake was second. Are we all in favour? Job done. Isn't that excellent? Thank you very much. All right. So we're going to move then to item 7, which is the Audit Committee Task Group Draft Terms of Reference. And so in essence, colleagues, we've been asked by Cabinet to do a task group piece of work on the decision making beyond the Highways Maintenance Service decision made earlier. So it's not to review the decision, but because it was a significant, sorry, Councillor Arnott, were you? Is it okay for me to continue my meeting, is it? All right, thank you very much. I don't mind guests, my meeting, all right. So we were looking at the work on the decision making, because it was such a significant decision, just the process to see whether we had any observations to make on how the decision was arrived at, whether colleagues had all of the information necessary for them to make an informed decision. So you've seen the draft terms of reference. I've read them, hopefully you have as well. Might I suggest that, given that we're a small committee of 7, that we don't actually set up a separate working group, because it'll only be 3 or 4 of us. The committee sits as a working group, all 7 of us, and then we try and get that job done. So any questions, colleagues? Are you content? Yeah, fine, thank you. So I propose, Councillor Hayward seconds, are we content? Brilliant. Okay, we're all in favour of that. Thank you for that. And then item 8, other matters, and these are brought forward as matters for information. So you remember at the last meeting we decided to write to the Cabinet Member for Health and Adult Services, and we've seen Councillor Keeling's reply, and we also wrote to the Cabinet Member for SEND, Councillor Bickley, and we've seen Councillor Bickley's reply, and Councillor Bickley is here. Councillor Bickley, is there anything you would like to add to your letter for the committee? Don't have to. I'm throwing you on the spot. I appreciate it.
No, nothing to add. Thank you.
Okay. Are members content with the responses? Do we need to write back to them and say it wasn't good enough?
The only thing is, Chairman, that when you have graphs and things like that, and it's percentages, I like numbers as well, so that I understand it more clearly.
No, I agree. So might we ask our support officer to just write to Councillor Keeling and say in future we like numbers? All right. Well, and we'll remember that for other letters we're going to write, no doubt, in future.
We've said this so many times in meetings other than audit, where officer reports or reports are as a percentage, and we have it's nothing to really measure it against, so it should just be a given, and I think officers need to filter that to everyone. Thanks.
I suspect it's a journey we constantly have to remind, but you are quite right, and we'll just have to remind people as well. That's brilliant. All right, so we're all content on that. So that leads me to tell you that the next meeting will be at 2 p.m. on the 29th of September. May I thank you for coming. May I wish you a lovely summer break, whatever you're doing in that time, or just enjoy whittling down your email inbox and getting those done. To officers, thank you very much. I hope you too have lovely holidays if you're allowed them. And well, see you at the end of September. Thank you. End of meeting. Thank you very much.